All right. Good afternoon, everyone. I know you've already been sitting all through a lot of talks, and this is the last one, which is usually the hardest one to get. But I promise you it will be worth your time. And even if you don't like what I'm talking about, I hope at least you guys got some popcorn now, which we brought for you. My name is Chris. I'm one of the co-founders and CEO of Lengoo. I will tell you a little bit more about Lengoo and what we're doing in a second. I'm also a member of the board of directors here at Bitkom. So I'm very excited to see that this AI topic finally gets the attention it should get. And that's why I'm also actually starting with a little recap. For those of you who maybe know me, I've been here already in 2019 with a talk about moving industries into the age of AI. It was a much harder talk to get attention about, as you can imagine. And we were actually talking about translations. And we will learn a little bit more in this talk today why we as a company started on first working on translations and why this is now benefiting us quite well and what we can learn from that. I also talked about the three ingredients we need for machine learning, technology, computing power, and data. And also keep that in mind because, a little spoiler alert, this is exactly the same still. Last but not least, we were also back then discussing a lot already whether translators will still have jobs. I can tell you already now they do. We still don't have enough of them. So nothing changed there, but this is also very relevant for this talk today. So basically what I would like to cover today is a little bit demystifying this entire topic around large language models, sharing with you what we have learned in customizing and training these models for our customers for now over 5 years, and also give you some tips how you can start on working on this topic if you're interested in. As I said, this is all a little bit of a déjà vu moment for us because all of this is not new. It's actually quite old. 2017, the paper was published, Attention is all you need for the experts around you. And this is still the very most important thing for today. So what is Lengoo? Lengoo is a language technology company. We're around 100 people. We're headquartered here in Berlin. We have offices in 5 locations by now. And our customers are largely large enterprise customers who work with us because they have understood that the combination of our customization technology and their proprietary data is the key to get these models to an accuracy level where you can actually use it in a B2B context. But more importantly, where you can actually drive a sustainable competitive edge. And we'll talk a little bit more about this as well. We're also united with our customers in our vision to build a trusted expert AI partner for every employee at the workplace. We're convinced that we can automate at least 50% of our office tasks, which we're doing today, using such assistants. So the really important word, though, there is expert. Because the systems we have today, and you guys are trying out ChatGPT and so on every day, they're generic knowledge systems. They've been trained on web data, so they can help us with pretty generic tasks. But how do we get this to a point that they become these super knowledge systems, so that they can not only master some day-to-day tasks in our office work, but literally every task, so that you have this really powerful partner you can ask all sort of things to do for you. And not only that, because it has all this information, it can generate insights that none of us could do because simply our memory would be too small, a problem that these models do not really have. And as you can imagine, what we need to do is the same thing what we need to do with our employees. We somehow need to onboard them to our company's context. And how do we do that? That's your data. That's your knowledge. That's your IP. Whether this is in your corporate language, whether this is in your documentation stuff that you have, whether it's meeting notes, whether it's emails, your BI data, marketing assets, whatever you have, that is the knowledge we have to get into these systems. We have built a technology that does exactly that. This technology is called Halos, Human Augmented Language Operating System. We will see in a second why the human component here is really important. And I don't want to go into too much detail here, but essentially it's a collection of all your data and a model that is trained on top of that, which you can access through an API or through any sorts of integrations which you have. So what we as a company are really doing is we're enabling organizations to operate their own sovereign large language model, and all of that with just a couple of clicks. You don't need to be a data scientist to do that. So why do we do this? Why do we do this customization effort? And I always like to bring these graphs here for us, which we call human intelligence gap graphs. So what you see here on the left is basically how much of the content these models are generating, and on the x-axis, how much has to be edited there. And now you can imagine, if it's pretty logic, if you train a system on generic content, on generic data, you would get exactly what you would expect, kind of a bell curve as we know it. So there are very few tasks which it is very good at. In the majority of the tasks or the content it generates, there's a lot of editing needed so that we can actually use it, and a lot of it is also crap. Now, what happens if we infuse your company's data in there? This starts looking very differently. All of a sudden, we have a majority of content that is generated you don't have to touch anymore and can just use as it is. And if we even go one step further in the customization, introduce a feedback loop from your employees, we get to pretty high levels where you do not need any interaction anymore. Now, this data is on machine translation data. This was our first task we as a company focused on because, as some of you might know, actually, these transformer models everyone is talking about are actually coming from machine translation. They were invented for this task, and we're happy that we could show across the board of all our customers that we can save these 50% that we were stipulating in this AI partner. So as the technology is now transformers also for these large language models, as we talk about now, what we can essentially do as a company, we can use these custom language models we have trained and apply them in all sorts of other areas. And that's exactly what we're doing at the moment. So we extended the modalities it can work with, video, audio, image, and a lot of other tasks you can solve with that, not just multilingual communication. So what I promised you, though, is that I want to share with you some learnings we had along this way of mastering machine translation and how they can be applied now to generative AI, large language models, whatever topic you want to use. Because, again, the underlying technology is the same. It's completely it can completely be taken over from translation to many of the other tasks. So the first problem for the more technical people among us is that all these problems we're talking about, they're limited task examples. So what does this mean? Unfortunately, there are too many words and too many combinations of words that we could just put all combinations in the database and have some rule-based system. We need to model somehow this language. And turned out, probabilistic modeling works quite well. Turns out, neural networks works quite well. And turns out, transformers are the best way to do this. And if you want to go a little bit further than just talking about language, you're taking other modalities in there to get a better world understanding of these models. The second challenge we had to overcome is that, unfortunately, all the data we all collect every day is not very clean. So in the past, we had to clean a lot of parallel text, which is source and target. Now we basically have to clean all sorts of data our customers are ingesting into this. So a very sophisticated multimodal data processing pipeline is essential to make this customization work. The next thing is, the output of such models is highly depending on the context. So when you take the translation example, if you do a translation in the context of finance, it's very different than to the context of HR or in marketing. The same thing is for basically every other office task you're doing. You have a very different process for all sorts of, basically the same task, but in a different context. So we need to contextualize these models. That's where model customization comes into place. We take existing data from things you have created, from things you have performed in the past, and we can teach these models how you like to do these things, what your preferences are. The next thing is that we actually have to align these models with what we expect as an output. Because, again, and I don't want to go into too much detail, the previous speaker here talked about this a little bit, these models are stupid. The only thing they're doing is they're predicting the next word. So you need to tell them what you're actually expecting if you ask them a question. In the past, for translation, we needed to tell them, if I give you a source sentence, I want the target sentence, whatever language I told them. Now I have to teach them, if I ask a question, I actually want an answer. And how should this answer look like? Again, a task of customization. The last thing is, unfortunately, also our preferences are changing over time, how we like certain tasks to be performed. So we need to include some sort of learning mechanism. In the past, we did it from our linguists. Now we do it from any office worker in an organization. Again, a task of customization. And last but not least, when you then get to a point to bring these models into production from a POC phase, it's super important that you give the users the confidence in the output of this. Take the translation example again. Most of us here in the audience probably don't speak Chinese, so if the model gives you a Chinese translation, how can you make sure that this is actually good and you can copy it into your email? You need some sort of confidence score. You need to show some traceability based on what part of the training material this output has been created. Same thing now for generative AI. You need to link somehow the training data to the output of your current task. We put all of this knowledge here at Lengoo in a platform that allows you to manage your data, to clean your data, to manage your models, to train your models, and to also allows you to give access to your grounding data or control the access to your grounding data depending on what confidentiality level your employees are. We also started providing an out-of-the-box UI where you can use all of these tasks. And again, I'm using this UI here mostly to explain to you that our AI strategies are very deeply embedded in here. So you see on the left side the contextualization window where you can say, now I want to perform a translation, a summary, a content generation, a transcription, a whatever you want to do in the context of HR or in marketing. And on the right side, you have the traceability area where you can gain your confidence in the output of the model. And last but not least, at the bottom, very small, you have a little feedback mechanism, which is also, you can go very deep in and actually changing the output, which is then being fed back into your custom large language model and continuously improved from that knowledge. So, after we had mastered translation, which, I mean, you never master it, but we were quite confident with the output, as you have seen, we were asking what other use cases can we serve with these language models. And as we didn't know, we simply set up a little task force, as many organizations are currently doing, and asked our customers, what could you imagine, now having used ChatGPT over Christmas, what could you imagine using this in a B2B context? We evaluated all the ideas. It's very simple based on how much time can you save if we automate that for you. And if you're really interested into the process of this entire study, we actually published this with Bitkom a couple of weeks ago, so you can read about this. Also together with Aleph Alpha, a company you might know from Germany as well in the same space. You can read about how we went about this in a more structural way. Essentially, what I want to share with you now is the outcome. Aside of multilingual communication, which we touched upon already a lot now, the third most asked thing was meeting documentation. I don't think I have to tell anybody here in this room that this is a very annoying task. So that's something obviously we should focus on. Content generation in all sorts of matters. Second most asked one, and the number one use case of LLMs, which I think many of us know by now, is knowledge discovery, making knowledge in the organization accessible, especially expert knowledge for non-experts. And that's exactly what we have been building since then. So you can now in our tool transcribe your meetings, you can correct your content, you can summarize your content, you can create content in bulk in whatever form you want to, and you can also ask questions on all of your data, whatever you want to. Yes. So as you've seen now, we've been doing this now for over 5 years, and we basically have been supporting, I would say, more of the early adopters of the AI wave for a long time now. And there are a couple of trends which we can point out and which I would like to share with you in terms of learnings to consider when setting up such a strategy for you. And there are two buckets basically. One is more on the technology side, the other one is more on the commercial side. So let's start with the first one. It's very important that when you set up such an AI system that you think about how this will continue to stay top-notch, how this will keep you as a company ahead of the competition. Because now you can say we also use AI. We are an AI-enabled business. We're so much better because we use AI. Quite frankly, I think much faster than we all can imagine, everyone will use AI in every space of their products very, very soon. So you will not be able to say we use AI, that's why we're better. You also wouldn't put on your website we're better because we use electricity or because we use laptops. And it will be the exactly same thing very, very soon and much faster than we can comprehend at the moment. So this customization piece I was emphasizing today is super important. You have to find a way how you can make use of data only you have, that you're ahead of anybody else for the tasks that are very important for you. Secondly, you need to capture the knowledge of your employees. Because unfortunately, not all our knowledge is documented somewhere. And we all have this problem of knowledge silos. So you really need to think about who should be allowed for what type of tasks to give feedback to these systems. Because you also don't want anybody to give feedback. You don't want a non-lawyer give feedback to your legal stuff. So these things are very important to think through, and especially the permission systems around that. What was our experience? And the last thing is, as these models become very powerful, as you have seen in terms of automation potential, IP protection and IT security is becoming a much, much bigger topic. Now, luckily, when you go for a custom model, a lot of these things are intrinsically solved because it's only your model, only your employees have access to. If you even want to go that far, you can deploy this on premise, you're super safe. But it's just something to really think about, not only from an IT security perspective, but especially from an IP protection perspective. And not only that something leaks, but also internally. Because this is not a database anymore where you need to be a data scientist to find the information. Everyone can ask a question about very sensitive information, and the model is going to tell you that. So you need to define access rights, who should have access to what type of information, all sorts of things. On the commercial side of things, how are you going to realize that? And that is very funny because we see exactly the same what we have seen in machine translation. People start using machine translation publicly available. They love it. They start using it for their very technical documentation, for marketing materials. It's not good enough. So especially corporates tend to, I'm going to build this on my own. There's a data science team being built. It takes forever to find these people. And after 2 years, they realize, man, we just managed to do 2 or 3 languages. This is not working. How are we going to do this? And that's usually when we come into play, because we provide a software that still allows you to keep full control of this, but it's literally just a couple of clicks to do. Now, I'm not telling you how you should do that. I'm just saying that this is exactly what we're experiencing now with the large language models. And we're very excited, of course, to be there to help out if there is any need. Lastly, or no, not lastly, second lastly, speed of implementation. You have to think about that now there is a hype, as people say it. There is definitely a hype, but it's not a hype in the sense that it's going to go away. We have to be very, very clear about this. What ChatGPT did, it put it on the roadmap. You see it at this conference everywhere AI. Every exec talks about it. So this will not go away. So now what you have to think about how you're going to use this, because there's a lot of excitement about this topic at the moment. So you can, of course, go with all of these nice out-of-the-box tools you can buy now. Most of them are built on top of OpenAI or GPT, which is cool if you really want to take the momentum, but you also have to think about what happens if in the end you have 50 of these applications installed across your organization. How are you going to bring all this knowledge again into one model? Because that's actually what you want. You don't want 50 experts you can ask. You want one expert who knows everything about your organization. Everyone in your company has access to and can ask anything they want. And last but not least, it's the same thing as in the past. Don't forget about the buy-in of stakeholders. Don't get too excited about starting on this trip because if your employees are not joining that. Everything we talked about, the customization, the feedback of the models from the experts in-house, this doesn't work. So you really got to find, and we see a lot of companies now doing that, setting up similar task forces as us, trying to understand which use cases are not only the most beneficial for them in terms of time savings, but where there's the most openness from employees to actually use them, to get adoption of this, and then expand moving forward from that. Now there are 3 more things I would like to touch upon, because I said I also want to demystify this entire thing a bit. And again, it's exactly the same discussions we had 5, 6, 7 years ago. On the machine translation side, will AI cause mass unemployment? And I can very confidently say no. We had the same discussion with translators, and I can tell you we didn't have enough translators 7 years ago. We still don't have enough translators to do all the work. It's the hardest thing to find, to be honest. But one thing is particularly important is that what we see is that those linguists who are against new technology, who didn't adopt the machine translation, they're having a really hard time. So it's super important for us leaders in these organizations to start training our employees on these technologies very fast. Because AI will change our jobs. I'm very confident it will change it much for the better. But it will change, and we need to be open for that. And unfortunately, here in Germany, we're not the best at accepting new technology and embracing it. So I highly encourage everyone to take another step at this to make it work. The benefits are very obvious. I don't want to go too much into this, but in all this entire is AI going to take over the world discussion, we're completely forgetting that we just don't find people. And I cannot imagine that any one of you in this audience doesn't have the same problem as everyone else I'm talking to. So the only thing, if we want to continue to grow in whatever dimension you want to measure grow, by the way, as we also have sustainability here as a topic, you need to make your existing workforce more efficient. So this is almost like a holy grail that came to us just at the right time so that the entire system doesn't collapse, and we should embrace it. Should it be regulated? Now that's something from a startup guy which you're probably not expecting to hear, but I deeply think it should be regulated. But it should be regulated only for the really high-risk applications. Because there are two problems with regulation. The first thing is, and that one you could say, who cares? Regulation always benefits the big corporates. So we will, and unfortunately, if you are a European company here, the US is already a little bit ahead in this entire game. So if we don't want to miss out, as we did with the cloud, we have to actually make it as easy as possible for new companies to enter this market, which regulation doesn't really help with. However, I think the more important problem with regulation is that it causes fear. And it causes exactly the problem that we always have in Germany. I'll just wait and see because I don't even know if I'm allowed to use this anymore with the regulation changing all the time. And I think that is something very important, that we cannot have this happen again, because as I said, we need it to continue to grow. We need to implement this properly so that we have a competitive edge, and we need to do it fast. Because there's one fundamental difference in this platform change as with the other ones. It's a self-learning system. So the earlier you start, the better you are, or to put it in negative words, the later you start, the harder it's going to get to catch up with your competitors who are already embracing AI. And I think that's it from my side. Thank you very much for your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Christopher. Any questions? We have a couple here.
Hello.
Hi.
I have a technical question. So I'm working with voice cloning software. It's also based on machine learning. And what I found with my work is that if you run the model too long, like if you take too many hours for it to learn, the result actually gets worse. So do you also experience that in your company, and how do you tackle this? Are you improving the algorithm, or is this something that you just cannot avoid?
So it's a very technical question. I'll try to answer to this. I'm a data scientist by profession, but I'm lucky that I have much smarter people now in my company to deal with this. But my first question is, so what are you using to customize these models, to train the models? Like, are you doing this manually, or are you using a certain tool? Open source. Yeah, okay. No, because the thing is that these, like traditionally, the large tech giants, not to name anyone, they're not particularly good at customizing. And maybe some of you have tried this with OpenAI, with they have an endpoint for fine-tuning, but it's not really working. And that's one thing, is because there are different models used as a baseline model to fine-tune. The most important thing, though, what we have learned is that there's very little effort spent on data cleaning. And so that's what we spent 2 years alone just to build this data processing pipeline. And since then, this works quite well. I cannot tell you all the details how this works, but there are certain mechanisms to check with the checkpoints whether it's still improving or whether we stop the training. That's how we do it. But I cannot tell you in many times this fails or improves. Oh, sorry.
Are there any more questions? It's your last chance, literally.
And by the way, for audio, I would argue it's the least impactful customizing it, obviously, right? It's like you just have to think about how, like, it's very good if you have very technical jargon you need to detect to define your vocabulary accordingly. But every one of us, if you take the transcription example, could transcribe a highly technical legal court hearing without even understanding what they're talking about in there, if it's in our mother tongue. Whereas this is much more difficult if you generate, if you synthesize, or if you translate text where you really have to understand the meaning. So that's why the customization has a little bit less impact there, I would argue.
Thanks also for the nice talk from my side. And another technical question, which large language model are you fine-tuning? Are you using GPT, or do you use other open source alternatives?
No.
Like Llama-based ones? Falcon, etc., what came out in the last couple of months, weeks?
Yes, so we only use open source models. The other ones are closed, and I just told you that the fine-tuning doesn't work. But for open source, we're completely open. You can bring your own one. I mean, we of course only take the ones that have a commercial license, so Llama would be a problem in that case. But there are many out there now, right? And that's also one of the things I didn't touch upon. But we need to demystify. It's not that difficult anymore to train such a foundation model. Just to look at how many open source ones come out, and now also the quality starts getting closer to what the known models are. So that's why we follow an approach. You can bring either your own model you can use from the open source models, and we just take care of the customization part, including data cleaning, data processing, and all the deployment piece of it.
Okay.